Have you ever heard of Chernobyl? Probably. It's one of the most well-known locations around the world. Most people know it because of the nuclear disaster that occurred there in 1986. But have you ever considered visiting Chernobyl? I recently had the opportunity to do so. And let me tell you, after hearing about the horrors that happened there, I was really scared to make the trip. There's a lot of reasons not to go there. And in this video, I'm going to share them with you. By the end of this video, you'll understand why visiting Chernobyl is never a good idea. April 26, 1986. History was changed forever when the Chernobyl nuclear power plant exploded. Located in northern Ukraine, the plant had been operational for 6 years before the disaster. On that fateful night, a power surge during a safety test caused a partial meltdown of the reactor. Within seconds, a massive explosion rocked the plant, releasing an enormous amount of radioactive material into the atmosphere. Flames engulfed the structure as smoke billowed into the sky, visible for miles around. The nearby town of Pripyat, home to thousands of families, was evacuated within days. As the full extent of the disaster became clear, a larger exclusion zone was established, encompassing not just Pripyat, but also the nearby villages and countryside. This area remains largely uninhabited to this day, serving as a stark reminder of the catastrophic event that unfolded there. The immediate aftermath of the Chernobyl disaster was devastating. Fire crews battled the blaze at the power plant, while others worked tirelessly to contain the spread of radioactive contamination. Animals and plants alike perished under the onslaught of radiation, creating a silent graveyard of life. More than 115,000 people were evacuated from the surrounding area, and many more were exposed to dangerous levels of radiation. The true cost of the disaster in terms of human lives is still debated, but it is generally accepted that hundreds of thousands of people died or suffered severe health problems as a direct result of the disaster. In the decades since the Chernobyl disaster, significant efforts have been made to clean up the contaminated areas and restore the surrounding ecosystems. However, the long-term impact of the disaster continues to be felt today. The exclusion zone remains a restricted area, and many parts of the surrounding region are still heavily contaminated with radioactive material. It is estimated that approximately 10% of the land within the 18-mile radius of the power plant is so contaminated that it may never be safe for human habitation again. Additionally, the disaster had a profound impact on the local wildlife. While some animals have been able to return to the area and thrive, others such as wolves, bears, and deer remain absent due to the high levels of radiation. Research has shown that the radiation has caused genetic mutations in some of the remaining animals, leading to an increase in birth defects and other health problems. One of the main reasons why you should never visit Chernobyl is the danger that it poses to human health. Even though the disaster happened over 37 years ago, the area is still highly contaminated with radioactive material. According to experts, the radiation levels in some parts of the exclusion zone are still too high for humans to be exposed to, without risking their health. Additionally, some areas have not been properly surveyed for radiation contamination, which means that visitors could easily be exposed to dangerous levels of radiation without knowing it. To make matters worse, the Ukrainian government has recently started to allow tourists to visit certain parts of the exclusion zone. While the government claims that these areas are safe for tourists to visit, many experts disagree. They argue that even low levels of radiation exposure can have negative health effects, especially over long periods of time. Some of the potential health effects of radiation exposure include cancer, birth defects, and genetic mutations. Moreover, the majority of the land within the 18-mile radius of the power plant is still considered unsafe for human habitation. The soil and groundwater are heavily contaminated with radioactive material, making it dangerous for anyone who comes into contact with them. For example, the nearby town of Pripyat, which was evacuated immediately after the disaster, is still too contaminated for people to live there permanently. Even if you take all the necessary precautions, such as wearing protective clothing and avoiding contact with contaminated surfaces, it's impossible to completely eliminate the risk of radiation exposure. Another reason why visiting Chernobyl is a bad idea is that it could disturb the delicate balance of the local ecosystem. The Chernobyl Exclusion Zone is home to a variety of plant and animal species that have been able to return to the area since the disaster. These species have adapted to the high levels of radiation and are part of a unique ecosystem that should be protected. When tourists visit the area, they can easily disturb the local wildlife and potentially damage the ecosystem. For example, by walking off designated paths, tourists could trample rare plants or disturb nesting animals. Additionally, tourists could introduce non-native species to the area, which could compete with or even prey on native species. Such actions could have a devastating impact on the fragile ecosystem that has developed in the exclusion zone. Furthermore, the increased foot traffic from tourists could lead to the spread of invasive species that could outcompete native species for resources such as food and water. This could lead to a decline in the population of native species and could even cause some species to go extinct. Moreover, the presence of tourists could also lead to the spread of diseases to which native species have no immunity. This could have a devastating impact on the local wildlife and could potentially wipe out entire populations. Despite the warnings, thousands of tourists visit Chernobyl each year. Many of them are unaware of the potential dangers of doing so. Some come to see the famous abandoned town of Pripyat, while others want to experience the eerie silence of the exclusion zone. However, it's important to remember that this is not just a tourist attraction. It's a site of a nuclear disaster that killed or injured hundreds of thousands of people. The long-term effects of the disaster are still being felt today, and the area is still contaminated with radioactive material. As such, it is important to treat the area with respect and caution. Before entering the exclusion zone, visitors should be aware of the potential risks and take all necessary precautions to protect themselves and the environment. Wearing protective clothing, staying on designated paths, and avoiding contact with contaminated surfaces are just a few of the steps that can be taken to minimize the risk of harm. It's also important to be respectful of the area's history and significance. The Chernobyl disaster was one of the worst nuclear accidents in history, and it's important to remember the victims and learn from the tragedy. Visiting Chernobyl can be a sobering experience, but it can also be an important reminder of the dangers of nuclear power and the importance of safety. When done responsibly, visiting Chernobyl can be a powerful experience that helps us learn from the past and better protect ourselves in the future. And lastly, another reason why you should never visit Chernobyl is because it is simply not worth the risk. The potential dangers to human health, the local ecosystem, and the disrespect shown to the victims of the disaster are simply not worth the price. It's important to remember that Chernobyl is not just a tourist attraction. It is a site of a terrible tragedy that should be treated with respect. Instead of risking your health and the health of the environment for a few pictures, consider learning about the disaster through other means such as documentaries and books. There are also virtual tours of the exclusion zone available online, which can give you a sense of what it's like to be there without actually having to go. Ultimately, the decision of whether or not to visit Chernobyl is up to each individual person. However, it is important to be aware of the potential dangers and to make a responsible decision based on the potential risks. Thank you for watching my video about Chernobyl. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel for more content like this. Also, let me know in the comments below if you have any other suggestions for places I should visit and tell me why I should go there. Again, thanks for watching and I'll see you next time.